We're joined by Taylor Zarzar of Sirius XM PGA Tour Radio and Josh Carpenter, who's the Assistant Managing Editor of Sports Business Journal. Josh, I want to start with you. You write a lot about the executive administration of sport across many sports. How feasible is it that active players are going to be able to have a significant controlling or active role in the board management of PGA Tour Enterprises? Because some of them are still trying to win trophies, some are still trying to just keep their card. It doesn't seem sustainable in the long term to me.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting to hear Kira's report just a minute ago about, players not necessarily being in on these regular meetings. You've certainly seen players at the PGA Tour level kind of insert themselves a little bit more, as we've seen in recent months, to get more of that control. You've seen it, George, you mentioned earlier talking about unions, and other leagues, that sort of thing. Look at the NBA, for example. Players in the NBA have a lot of control right now over where they play. You see a LeBron James, you see a Stephen Curry. A lot of big name players can kind of go to their teams and say, I don't really want to play here. These players have a lot of control. Is that sustainable at the PGA Tour level? I'm not sure. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out at kind of that board level.
Taylor, golf fans, do you think they're reaching a point of exhaustion with everything that's happening outside the ropes, or is this temporary until major season, which has now had the added emphasis of everyone coming together 4 times a year?
Beyond that, George, I mean, you're a big Missouri Tiger, and I know that all that's going on in college sports is frustrating right now with the transfer portal and the NIL. But when you watch your Mizzou Tigers play on Saturdays, you're not thinking about all of those things. You're concentrating on the game. You want to talk about whether Mizzou has a chance to win 10 games and get to a big bowl game and have a big season. And I think once the tournaments begin, certainly that's the case with our listeners. That's the case with your viewers. I do think, though, George, there's interest on Monday, Tuesdays, and Wednesdays. I think these are the days to have these types of discussions about the future of the game, because we're all wondering what our sport is going to look like a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now. But by the time the Valspar Championship is going on tomorrow, I think that's when it's time to concentrate on the tournament. What we got last week at the Players' Championship was a perfect example of that. Everybody that connected to that tournament said, thank you. We're concentrating on a thrilling finish with the best players in the world.
It's interesting, though, so many of these conversations we're hearing don't involve the executives who are investing and making decisions. We don't hear from Jay Monahan a lot. We don't hear from John Henry at all. Josh, a lot of these questions seem to go to players every week who have taken this position of advocates or, in some cases, pretty active board members. Is there any example out there of a sport that is successful by having the athletes so close to the levers of power in the business and political sense of the sport?
I mean, I'll just use the NBA example I used a minute ago. I mean, I would say, like, the NBA is, yes, their viewership has been down a little bit in recent years, but still the NBA is wildly popular based on some of that kind of player control, I would say, based on players being able to kind of dictate where, their star players being able to dictate where they want to play. If you look at the NBA week to week, a lot of people are interested in that kind of free agency and who's going to play where, almost from my standpoint, almost more than the games themselves sometimes. And so I don't know if you would see that, like I said, at the PGA Tour level, where they're not necessarily controlling, a different team they're playing on week to week. But that's a pretty good example in my mind.
Taylor, how do you think the Strategic Sports Group will have its impact felt in the coming months?
Well, I think that they're going to do a deep dive in what's happening with the PGA Tour and what they're monetizing at the PGA Tour. And, as an example, PGA Tour Live, what you guys do on Golf Channel, what we do on SiriusXM PGA Tour Radio, all the different ways that they're connecting to the audience. I think they will take a deep dive into what we're currently doing with that and how fans are consuming it. I think that's the biggest thing that they'll do. I mean, I'll admit, as a diehard Red Sox fan who's very frustrated that the Strategic Sports Group is spending so much time on this and no starting pitching for the Red Sox in 2024, they have done a phenomenal job of growing the Red Sox audience through the years because of the ways that they connect to their audience through streaming devices, the radio, through television. And I think that that's what John Henry, Sam Kennedy, and others, Tom Werner, will focus their interest on. But, to the point that Josh and each of you are making, it's fascinating to me, Kira's report about Webb Simpson, Peter Malnati, and these guys going to the Bahamas after they competed in the Players to try to work out a unification agreement. And then they have a meeting last night about the future of the Strategic Sports Group and the PGA Tour Enterprises. Oh, by the way, your tee time's tomorrow in the Valspar Championship. I mean, that is a lot to handle. And I do think, as Eamon said, and I hate when he makes great points, Joe Ogilvy and some other people that used to be PGA Tour players are probably best positioned to serve in those roles moving forward and represent the players' interests.
So much of what we've seen over the last couple of years, Josh, has gone through the PGA Tour's policy board, which has, it's been there forever, as long as the tour itself in terms of governance. Is that now a diminished body left to do housekeeping with whatever player grievances are, and the actual shape of the future of this sport is going to be seen through the board of PGA Tour Enterprises, the for-profit entity?
Yeah, maybe in the short term, it takes a little bit of a backseat just because all this focus, Taylor mentioned the monetization of the game and kind of where that goes. That's going to be largely focused on PGA Tour Enterprises. So maybe you do see a diminished role for the policy board in the short term as Enterprises gets kind of ramped up and gets going. But I think in the long term, there's still a lot of important things, governance across the game that'll be decided on that policy board. You still have a lot of crossover between the two boards. So short term, maybe yes, but long term, I think it'll still have a pretty important place for the PGA Tour.
Taylor, yesterday John Rahm did a preview press conference for the Masters tournament as the defending champion. He had some interesting comments, and some of them you see right here on reunifying the game. He said, "I still respect everybody on both sides, respect the game of golf above all. Now the future of the game at this point is up to the people higher up. I think I've said it before. I think there's a way of coexisting. And if there's some type of union, I don't know what that looks like. But again, I just want to be able to see the best in the world compete against the best in the world, whatever that looks like." And he had some other comments about missing tournaments that he was the defending champion on this season. It sounded in some ways like a note of regret. Do you think John Rahm's kind of impatient, looking at Scotty Scheffler out there now as the undisputed #1, and John Rahm thinking, well, I'd like to actually be playing against that guy?
Well, the two of us, Eamon and I recently were visiting with a current PGA Tour player who expressed that John has some regret about this long before John made these comments yesterday, and it certainly sounds like it. I think, Eamon, he thought that by leaving and going to live, certainly getting hundreds of millions of dollars that comes with it, that he also would unify the game, that almost immediately we would have some announcement that everyone would be able to play in the same place. And I think he's disappointed and a bit regretful that that has not happened yet. I don't know that necessarily he's willing to fork over all the hundreds of millions of dollars that Liv and the Public Investment Fund gave him, but I do think that it's clear he would like to come back and play in some of those tournaments. Webb Simpson recently talked about how there's probably a handful of guys that would like to do that and they would like to have back in their tournaments. I don't know that we'll ever see Dustin Johnson or Phil Mickelson or Lee Westwood or Henrik Stenson play in PGA Tour events ever again, and I don't think they want to. But I do think that there are a number of guys, Rahm included, that would like to do that.
Let's do one final question here. Josh, curious if you could paint the picture for us on what model you would want to see the PGA Tour now implement with this PGA Tour Enterprises going forward in the next 6 to 12 months.
Yeah, I think you could look at it, from a couple different angles, George. I think the one of the things that people talk about a lot, and there's a lot of, hand-wringing about, is the television product. There are too many ads, the commercial load's too big. I think Jay Monahan spoke in August about this new investment coming in and how that could potentially alter the TV product. Maybe you have presented by hours like we've seen, you have more of those. I think a lot of people really want that TV product to get better. You've heard a lot of talk about kind of a global tour. Rory's made a lot of comments about a global tour. I still wonder with the tour's current TV partners if they're going to go for that. Is CBS going to go for one of their premier tournaments airing in the middle of the night because it's in Australia or in Asia? That's why CBS, your own network, NBC, they love that 3 to 6 p.m. window on Sunday afternoons. It's such a prime window. And so I think that's been probably one of the main holdups to kind of seeing this global tour is these network partners. Their ratings are going to go down a ton if these events are airing overnight. So I think that's one of those things that's been tossed around a lot, but I still am kind of hesitant to say that global tour is really going to happen.
Taylor, quickly, do you have any thoughts on the model you'd
Yeah.
like to see?
Well, I just wanted to add to what Josh said. I think that if that ever comes to existence, what would make the most sense is for those international tournaments to be played in January and in July. In January is when you could go to Australia, you could go to Japan, you could go places like that while the NFL is ruling the roost. College football is as well with their new playoff system that's about to be unveiled. And then in July, you could have the British part of the schedule as well. So I think that would be the time to do it. But to Josh's point, the rest of the year, the traditional times where we've been watching professional golf finish between 3 and 6 p.m. on the East Coast of the United States, I don't think that CBS, NBC, or any American network is going to give up on that.
Perfect plug for catching the Valspar here on Golf Channel tomorrow at 2 Eastern. Guys, thanks for the time. Appreciate the conversation.